Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today it is time for Friday Reads on May 24th. Yes, we are in the final week of May, believe it or not. And I think I do believe it because I've been working on my June TBR, and that is a video that will be coming up in the days ahead very soon. I've got plans. I'm really excited about my June TBR, even though I always have these competing feelings because I put it together and they're all books that I really, really want to read. But then I look at my cart and there's all these other books that I really, really want to read. And there's only one of me with one pair of eyes and one brain and who cannot read more than two books at a time. So the dilemma persists. And maybe it would be eased if I stopped finding books to add to the TBR, either on paper or the ones that I actually purchase. But what joy does that bring me? So that, never mind about that idea. The problem will just continue. But anyway, so here we are in the last week of May. I hope that you had a good week. We are heading into this, I don't know, it's been pretty warm for a while, but I think this weekend is going to be the first like really incendiary weekend here in the coastal bend. The forecast is in the mid 90s, and then there's the humidity. So, there's that heat index, which is like 115 or something absurd. And basically, if you've never lived in the South, and especially in the coastal South of the United States, it's basically when you walk outside, if you wear glasses, they will instantly fog over, and you feel like you're walking through a boiling hot car wash. Like the feeling of wet towels slapping your face and body as you stroll through the air. That's basically the sensation. So that's one reason why I bought a new toy this week, and I will put in a picture. But I bought a walking pad, or they're also called like under the desk treadmills. So basically they're treadmills like the ones at the gym, but on a much smaller scale so that they fit in your house. And I guess some people do use a walking desk and they walk on them while they're doing meetings and stuff. And I'm retired, so I don't need that. But I just wanted to add more walking during the months where it's really hard to walk outside. I love walking outside, but this time of year it's at least in the upper 80s by the time I wake up, and it's just too hot. So I will walk more if I'm not, dying on the pavement as I do it. So I want to, mix this in with the other indoor workouts that I do. A little investment in my health and in keeping me busy in the hot months and keeping me walking. So I'm excited. That's the new thing I bought this week, which has nothing to do with BookTube, but I just thought I'd throw that in as part of my weekly report. So in TV viewing, Stephen and I finally finished our Schitt's Creek rewatch, and then he and I are in the last season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is getting kind of sad because it's getting close up to where Richard Lewis passed away. And then by myself, when nobody was here, I started watching Heartstopper, and I have a few episodes left of that, and I have loved Heartstopper. Then my family came back, and they were all like, "You watching young adult romance shows?" I'm like, yes, I am. But it is just a charming show. I love how they converted it from graphic novels but left in the little animated things and little fluttery. When people have different kinds of feelings, there's little fluttery leaves or hearts or things like that. And it's just a really sweet-natured show. There's serious topics in here as well, but it's just something very wholesome about the whole thing. All the characters are really appealing. Well, most of them. There's a couple of people that the whole point of their character is that they're kind of a pain in the butt. It's not the kind of show I usually would watch or the genre, but it was absolutely delightful. And I'm just so glad that it's there, and that I hope, I don't know, I just get a good feeling thinking about young people now watching this show and getting something out of it for themselves personally, not just me kind of enjoying it as an older person thinking, oh, it's so charming. So anyway, loving Heartstopper. So at long last, let's talk about what I've been reading. So I finished two books. I finished Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora, Neale, Hurston. And this was a reread. Actually, both of the books I finished were rereads. And it is the story of Janie. I'm going to try to talk about a little bit without spoilers, because I know some people have still never read this book. It's a 20th century classic about Janie, a Black American woman, and it takes place at the beginning of the story. Janie's a teenager, and she is being raised by her grandmother, who was previously enslaved. So you have a time period in the early 1900s, and Janie at the beginning first starts to experience her sexual awakening, but this is not described in any kind of body part type terminology. It's described with nature imagery, and it's really a beautiful opening to the novel. But what seems beautiful to Janie is alarming to her grandmother, who instantly and hastily arranges a marriage. She's afraid that something will happen and Janie will go astray. And so Janie doesn't get a whole lot of say in this marriage setup, and it's not what she would have chosen to do. And Janie spends a lot of her life doing things that are maybe not entirely what she had chosen, or they don't turn out the way that she planned. And without giving too much away, Janie is married more times than one in this book, and she is progressively growing into herself, growing in her personal strength and identity, and she's really having a coming of age well into her 40s. And it is a beautiful thing to watch as Janie lives through these different passages of her life, and she just grows, and she endures a lot of things. Some of them are true hardships, and some of them are more just sort of like the everyday beatdowns of life. She lives the largest portion of her life in a town that is largely established by one of her husbands, and it's a town of Black people. We get to see this town from her point of view, and also the townspeople's point of view of she and her husband, and who is the mayor. And the dialect and the conversations are really create a rich tapestry in this novel. I did get impatient from time to time because as a reread, what I really loved is the evolution of Janie. So all of the side trails about like the parts that are supposed to be funny, or long extended conversations by old dudes that sit out on stoops and, you know, shoot the crap. Some of those I didn't appreciate as much as I did the first time, because I was like, yeah, I know about that, but let's get back to Janie. And there was the portion of the story coming up that I really wanted to relive. So I probably gave some of those parts short shrift that are actually really essential to the story. But since I had read them before, I was like, okay. It's, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but it kind of reminded me of the King and Duke sections in Huckleberry Finn, where the first time you read them, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so ridiculous. And then when you're rereading, you're thinking, oh, it's them again. And you want to get on to the Huck and the Jim part. So anyway, but I love the writing in this book. There's some really beautiful passages, and I'm going to try to share one that doesn't really do any spoiling, so that you can just see what the language is like. Okay, let's try this one. This is this is a passage about Janie and her thoughts at night. And that comes up multiple times in this book. The things that come upon her that she puzzles over and ponders in bed at night. Most of the day she was at the store, but at night she was there in the big house, and sometimes it creaked and cried all night under the weight of lonesomeness. Then she'd lie awake in bed, asking lonesomeness some questions. She asked if she wanted to leave and go back where she had come from and try to find her mother. Maybe tend her grandmother's grave. Sort of look over the old stomping ground generally. Digging around inside herself like that, she found that she had no interest in that seldom seen mother at all. She hated her grandmother and had hidden it from herself all these years under a cloak of pity. And then ... and leaving something out. Some people could look at a mud puddle and see an ocean with ships, but Nanny belonged to that other kind that loved to deal in scraps. Here Nanny had taken the biggest thing God ever made, the horizon, for no matter how far a person can go, the horizon is still way beyond you, and she pinched it into such a little bit of thing that she could tie it about her granddaughter's neck tight enough to choke her. She hated the old woman who had twisted her so in the name of love. And then she goes on with those thoughts. And this is something that I always find really interesting in fiction, when, or really it happens in memoirs a lot too, when somebody thinks about the situation they grew up in that was supposedly under the umbrella of love and care, and they're looking at it as an adult in a new light and seeing maybe some damage or trauma that was wrought upon them, or sometimes it goes the other way where they see something that they remember negatively, but then they have a different compassion for that adult from the past. So it goes different ways, but that kind of re-examining of where you came from and where it has brought you, and what you thought you wanted and what was really happening and all that. I find that I always love that material, like mining that material. So Janie re-examines relationships throughout the book and then makes course corrections when she can. And gradually, as the book progresses, she becomes stronger and more in control of her own destiny. So that was my reread of Their Eyes Were Watching God. And then I also reread a book that didn't hold up as well. Well, I kind of knew it wasn't. I mentioned this last week. But I reread Kate Atkinson's Started Early, Took My Dog. And I've been rereading the Jackson Brodie series gradually, leading up to the release of the next book in the series. And I really loved the first book. The second book was pretty good. The third book I really loved. The fourth book is a weak link. And I kind of remembered this, and then I mentioned this when I'd started last week, and I did go ahead and read the whole thing. That was kind of what happened. Part of it is her intricate plotting that always, I talked about in another review, how it pulls together like a drawstring bag. Well, some of the strings fell out of this bag because there was a couple of huge unresolved situations in this book, especially for a book that's supposed to be a mystery. There are unsolved mysteries. There are things that like are pretty large, like pretty major parts of the plot that where the book just ends and nobody was really even trying very hard to solve those things. And I was like, wait, what about, I mean, there's two major, huge things unresolved. And Jackson, he's a funky character. I like Jackson Brodie, but he has some serious flaws. And every now and then he has this very sexist streak that comes out. And sometimes he self-corrects. Like he just knows. He'll be like, okay, I know that's wrong, but I just kind of think that sometimes. And you're like, fair enough. You're being honest about it. Okay. But a couple of times in this book, I was just like, really? Oh, come on. Like there's a scene. This is not really a spoiler because he just does this sometimes. He has a one-night stand. So he goes out and because he is frequently, he just does reckless things or has poor judgment, even though at this point in the series, he's about 50 years old. But he goes out and gets drunk one evening in the middle of whatever he was supposed to be doing. He just, I don't know, he's stressed out. He gets drunk. And he wakes up the next morning and some woman is in the bed. Or he's not even, I don't think he's at his place. I think he doesn't know where he is. But there's a woman. And he doesn't know who she is. But his thoughts are so hypocritical. Like first he thinks, how come the world is so full? Everywhere you go, there's just women like this. And I'm thinking, what were you doing? It appears that the world is full of men like you since you found each other, right? So he's kind of insinuating that there's just kind of random women for the taking everywhere you look. And, of course, there he was looking. So that was irritating to me. And, just lack of curiosity. Describes her really negatively. He wakes up and she's just kind of like finds her unappealing and he gets away as fast as he can. And I don't know. It sat badly with me. But the main problem was the enormous unsolved situations, which as I recall, I think we just move on to a different plot entirely in the next book. So I don't know, are we coming back around to any of this or not? So tentatively, I would read the last book in this upcoming month, but I have a pretty stacked TBR, and that would be the one that I might take a breather and move it a little further ahead, but we shall see. We shall see. Okay, so that brings me up to what I am currently reading, which is 2 books. And I am reading, this is part of Mental Health May, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. And I am about halfway through this book. And This is a tough one. I will read maybe a chapter or two, and then I just have to go do something else or read something else because this is pretty emotionally heavy. This is the memoir that Didion wrote about a year out from a really terrible year in her life. Her daughter, who was in her 30s at the time and recently married, she's gone into a very serious illness. It started out as like a flu or a pneumonia, but at the start of the book, um, it's at the holidays, at Christmas time. She ended up in the hospital, and she's got multiple infections. She's in a medical coma. It could go either way. So it's an incredibly stressful time for Didion and her husband, John Dunn. And in the midst of all this, they go home one evening, and this is all at the first couple pages, not a spoiler. They go home from the hospital. They're making dinner. She's making a salad, and he's sitting in the living room having a drink. And then all of a sudden, she turns around. He's on the floor. And he has a massive coronary event, and he dies. And so that's the beginning of the book. Her daughter is in the ICU, and her husband abruptly dies. So this is the beginning of a year-long experience and exploration of grief. And so just a horrendous year of grief and loss for Joan Didion. And in this book, so far, she's talking about some of the strange psychological effects and how she went through these mechanical motions right when this happened, the things you do. And a social worker refers to her as a cool customer, kind of mean like she's not hysterical, she's not falling apart. You can tell her what's going on. She's doing the things. But she thinks about, well, what exactly does that mean? And what if I acted like this? And then what would they have done? But then how, on the one hand, it's like she's almost masking and doing the appropriate things, but that her brain is doing all these crazy tricks as it processes the situation. And it's really fascinating, and it's kind of tough material, but it's her writing, so it's really good. One thing that she said in passing, though, that I don't really agree with is she said that as she's preparing and writing this book, she was noticing that she said that there's scanty portrayals of grief in literature and fiction, and I don't agree with that at all. I feel like I encounter that a lot of different aspects and approaches to grief. I feel like it comes up all the time, both immediate grief and also long-term grief that you revisit or that is triggered or brought up by newer circumstances. I feel like I read about that a lot, and let me know what you think, because I feel like I feel like that's a very universal human condition that I see used a lot in fiction. So but you can tell me what you think in the comments. And then last but not least, I am still reading Sun, which is the last book in the Giver Quartet. All books together in this volume, which is pretty hefty but handy for reference. This is the last part of a reading project to read or reread all 4 books in the Giver Quartet that I've been doing with Michael Clark. We've been on a little journey reading these books. A lot of people only have ever read The Giver and did not either know there was a whole quartet or just never got through it all. But if you really loved The Giver, I do recommend, or if you haven't read The Giver, I recommend that. And then if you really love it, I recommend continuing on. But just know that these are not sequels. It's not a series where the story continues and goes on. Each one is set in a different dystopian alternative world. It seems to be on Earth, but they're almost like different imaginary villages, and as you move from book to book, but there are links. There are some character links or hints of the other worlds in each book. And so in the final book, it begins most directly compared to the others related to the Giver, because it begins in that same world of the Giver, and it has to do with Claire, who is a teenage girl. Now, in The Giver, if you've read it or if you haven't, it's a very controlled society. It's colorless, emotions are blunted, there is no extremities of anything, there's no extreme discomfort. The climate is controlled. The world is very controlled and orderly. And when you are 12 years old, you find out what your occupation is going to be as an adult, and you begin to train for that as you complete your education. And it's a big deal when you're 12, you find out. And so, but our main character in Sun was assigned birth mother. And this is very interesting because in this culture, people don't get together and have a baby. They do it through insemination, and then a baby is nurtured as an infant and then placed with a paired couple to raise. So there's not the family bond of making your own children or adopting children. It's a more clinical process. And so certain young girls are basically used to produce the babies, and after they've produced a few babies, then they go and do some other job on the kind of lower end of what would be, training required. So Claire is a young girl who's assigned to be a birth mother. And the thing that I find kind of fascinating, I don't know if there's going to be any more discussion of it within this book, but it's in The Giver and then it's in this too, that is kind of that role is faintly disdained. That while everyone is very polite and agrees that birth mothers are essential to our society, it's also a disappointing assignment. And girls who are assigned that are generally considered to be maybe not very bright, or not very ambitious, or not very intellectual. And so there's just something very topical and timely in these attitudes. But anyway, it's about Claire, who is a birth mother, and what happens when she becomes curious about what happened to her child. So that, I don't want to give too much, but that's what happens. So who her child is and what happens with Claire and all of that is the story. And what else is really interesting about Sun is that most of these other books, the whole book is in that one little place. And this one, we have some setting changes. And when the settings change, so does the tempo and the pace and the level of tension, or the cause of tension. And so there's a lot. This is the longest book of the four, and it's rich material. So I'm enjoying it so much. I'll probably finish it this weekend because I'm kind of gobbling through it, and I blatantly sped ahead of the buddyship in the reading, but Michael understands how that happens. So he told me I could go ahead and talk about the book in the video. So here I am. All right, so what am I reading next? I don't know. If I finish these, I might read something kind of rogue and random before I start in on my June TBR, or I might just jump into that. But be watching out, because I'm going to be doing a June TBR video in the next couple days. And I don't know if I'm going to save it for Tuesday or do it before and then do a tag on Tuesday. Haven't quite decided. But anyway, that's what's going on. So tell me what you're planning to read. Maybe you're having a 3-day weekend. It's Memorial Day weekend here in the US. I'm retired, so it doesn't really matter. But some people are getting a 3-day weekend. So let me know what you're doing, what you're reading, what you're looking forward to. I hope that you have a great weekend. And if it is as hot as it is here, keep it cool, stay inside, read a book, walk on your treadmill. Go buy a treadmill. Anyway, have a great week. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.